Hi, Tim Smith of the Smith Group presenting today our podcast Room, where we're here to highlight and expose the amazing properties, places, people, and stories of Southern California to the world. Today's episode, we have Jeff Moorad, one of the prolific sports agencies that transitioned into ownership. His vision is amazing. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Tim. Good to be here.
So I just want to start with some housekeeping Newport Beach stuff, because people that are watching are very clear. Why Newport Beach? Why Orange County?
You know, I guess it goes back to college. I dated a gal who lived on Balboa Island, and I used to come down to Newport to see her. And I'm like, oh my God, you live on this idyllic island in the Pacific. Are you kidding? And I said, you know, if I ever have a chance, that's where I want to be. And so,
and that was your first time to Orange County, was to Balboa Island?
Pretty much.
And you've stayed?
Yeah.
Because all the places you've lived in, some different places. I think you lived in Big Canyon when you raised your family, right? Which is a great golf course gated community. Then you lived on the Little Island, and now you live on like one of the most epic locations on Little Island. Have you ever thought about other areas, or is that just kind of the spot?
Not really. I just think, you know, every time I drive over the bridge on Balboa Island, you know, it's kind of like going on vacation.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I just feel everything just kind of settles.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's a relaxing place, and I love the feel.
It's funny though, when you live in like Big Canyon, Dover Shores above, you don't feel the same like you're on vacation vibe. Once you kind of go over PCH over the water, it does something to you, right?
Something about the water, you know.
Yeah.
They say that people around the world always have, you know, kind of congregated around water. You know, in different parts of the world, it's like the biggest cities tend to be on the water. And it's no surprise that people are attracted to Newport Beach because of it.
So a couple other things, if you're going to coffee, places that you really like. Lunch spot, coffee spot, Newport Beach, where would it be?
Well, since I don't drink coffee, I'm
oh,
not a
there
very
you
good
go.
one to ask.
That's right.
But yeah, look, I'm a this is probably not the right thing to say on a public broadcast, but I'll say it anyway. You know, I'm a men's grill at Big Canyon guy.
Yeah, I see you there often.
I basically eat all my meals there. When I'm on my own, when my significant other isn't in town, that's where I go, and they know what I like, and I know what I enjoy ordering there. So that's my hang. But I'm an El Cholo guy.
Okay, El Cholo, good.
El Cholo, probably favorite.
What about date night?
Date night, we'll do El Cholo.
Okay.
Or we'll do Royal Hen on the island.
There you go.
Big fan of Cynthia at the Royal Hen. Enjoy that a lot. But you know, we venture out a little and sometimes go to Bandera or Gulfstream.
Yeah, for sure. Those are always the staples. So in your career, in your life, you've traveled a ton. Give me a little context of other places and how you feel about Orange County just living wise.
Well, you know, look, I travel a lot these days, as I'm sure we'll discuss, because I tend to track the Formula One calendar around the world. Just got back from Abu Dhabi last week, and you know, this year I went to 9 races. 2 of them were in the U.S., but the rest, you know, globally. And you know, every time I come back, I just like, oh my God, like, why did I leave?
Yeah, right.
It's just, you know, I don't mean to sound like a postcard here, but but the fact is, it's, you know, it's an idyllic place to live, and I wouldn't trade it for anywhere.
Well, the first 20 years of my career, I felt like I lost buyers, international, national buyers, to Miami, to New York, to LA, to Malibu. It seemed to be a little too sleepy here, but with the transition and kind of the paradigm shift of COVID, people's hyper focus on safety, lifestyle, climate. I mean, we're seeing buyers from everywhere, which is unique. Like, I'm seeing buyers, international buyers, or we've always kind of had a West Coast hub, you know, Arizona, Utah, Nevada. People would have their house on Balboa Island. Now you're seeing people from Wisconsin, from New York, from Miami. So I think the secret's out. I mean, it's the bittersweet, but we really are becoming a second home community.
It's not bittersweet if you're selling homes.
That's right. It's not bittersweet for me, but maybe for some of the people that don't like logo. I guess we're not really Montana, not, right? So, well, let's dive into this. Like, your story to me and to the people around me is very inspirational. And I wanted to start a little background before we get there. As a child, and we'll get into the ownership and the path, were there any thoughts or did you have any seeds of someday I want to own a professional sports team?
I don't think so.
No?
I mean, I don't think I was smart enough to get there, but I was a fan. Grew up in Northern California. Willie Mays was my favorite baseball player. I rooted for the old Oakland Raiders and San Francisco 49ers back in the day. But I was really a Giants fan. Rooted for the great Giants teams as a kid in the mid '60s. Boy, that sounds like a long time ago. And '70s, and those were my teams.
Yeah.
And, so I was a fan, but I didn't really, extend it to the idea of getting into the business at that point.
See, I think I was probably looking for validation because when I was 13 years old, I was supposed to be a Utah Jazz ball boy. And my dad decided that it was time to move to California. And so I begged and pleaded with him to let me stay. And even to the extent where Thurl Bailey, one of the Utah Jazz players, like, you can stay with me. And he looked at me for like 2 seconds like, do you think I'm going to let you live with an NBA basketball player? Never going to happen. And we were driving across the 15 from Utah to California. And I don't think I spoke to him for the first 2 hours because I was literally like having a temper tantrum. And I think we were in Beaver, Utah, and I said, you know what? Like, I can't believe you're ruining my dreams. And something came up where he said, well, change your dreams. I'm like, all right, I'm going to do it. And this was February 12th, 1989, because I remember I was missing the NBA All-Star game. And he said, okay, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to own the Utah Jazz. And he's like, really? When are you going to do that? And I said, March 20th, 2027. And I've said that ever since. And the funny thing about that whole thing, Larry H. Miller had it in a trust. It was never going to sell. Then COVID happened, and then Ryan Smith bought it. So maybe I missed my opportunity, but I was hoping for validation because maybe there was a seed to plant.
Well, at least you got the last name right.
Yes. And I know him a little bit. So going back to, want to start with, went to UCLA, went to Villanova, which I know that you're a huge fan and you've donated to since then. How did you get into the sports agency profession?
Yeah, it was probably a little at UCLA. I remember one day I made an appointment with the old athletic director, kind of legendary guy named J.D. Morgan. He's the guy that hired John Wooden.
For sure.
Back in the day. And, I'm an undergrad student at UCLA, and I'm like, I wonder how many undergrads could actually request a meeting with the athletic director. Probably not that many.
Right.
So I did.
Yeah.
And, he did the meeting, and he ended up introducing me to a couple of close friends of his.
We should take a pause right there, because it's one of those things where it's like when you're trying to get wherever you want to go, it probably would seem you shouldn't ask the athletic director for a meeting. He's probably going to say no. Did you ever think about that?
No, I just logicked out that there can't be that many people that ask him.
Yeah.
At least that are on campus students.
Did you get any pushback?
No.
He just took the meeting.
Took the meeting.
That's awesome.
Took the meeting.
Yeah.
And so I explained to him that, I was where I was from and, that I was going to graduate in a year or whatever. And I said, look, I'm interested in sports and I'm, potentially interested in representing athletes. And he said, you need to meet my friend, Sam Gilbert. And so I ended up going to see Sam Gilbert, who was this, kind of grandfatherly guy at the time, who was known as, in fact, the granddaddy of UCLA basketball. And he was the guy that took care of all the players back before the NCAA cared.
Yeah.
He, used to supply them with cars and, would take care of them. And more importantly, from my perspective, he negotiated their contracts when they went to the NBA. So, he sat there and told stories about how he had negotiated Lewis's first contract with the Milwaukee Bucks. Well, I knew he was talking about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yeah.
And he talked about negotiating Jamal Wilkes, although he called him Keith.
Yeah.
Keith Wilkes' contract with the Golden State Warriors when he was drafted out of UCLA. And I'll never forget this line he had. He said, I was meeting with Franklin Muley, who owned the Warriors at the time, and we're at a little Italian restaurant in San Francisco. And he said, I made sure that a check never came to the table. And I was sitting there at age 21, like wide-eyed, right? Like,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like, how cool would that be? Like, make sure, that the owner of the team never sees a check.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, wow, that is cool.
Yeah.
So, look, I sat there and listened to stories like that. And
when you, going back to that, so you meet with the athletic director, he introduces you to Sam Gilbert. Sam Gilbert just took a meeting with a 20-year-old?
Yeah.
Just because? Yeah. I mean, you must have been impressive to the athletic director, or...
I mean, maybe, but I don't think so. I think it's just...
But it's something to be said, because kind of like the Aladdin factor. If you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it, right?
Well, that's true. That's
right?
absolutely true. Yeah. That's a theme of my life, for sure, which is, look, I mean, you have to be entrepreneurial in order to create opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't just all show up on your doorstep.
Totally.
So that, in that sense, I mean, look, I've always looked for, openings, interesting opportunities, and this just happened to be something that, I thought that I might have a passion for. And so I, said that I was interested in representing players, and Sam Gilbert was, good enough to, to kind of at least tell me his stories about UCLA basketball players, and furthermore made the point that, look, most of the people in the business were bad people. Well, that's interesting, and in my mind I thought, well, that might mean that there's an opening for people who actually do it the right way.
What did he mean by bad people? Just not...
I mean, people that, took advantage of players.
Yeah.
Or
just not looking at their best interest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or potentially getting involved in their financial affairs and, investing money, in bad ways or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, again, I was just, kind of a sponge for information and for, philosophies about business at the time. And so I took it all in and, kind of began to craft my own path.
But at the time, you probably had a lot more options. So it's not like this path was like, oh, I met with Sam Gilbert, now I want to do this.
Not really.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been a pretty, singularly focused person. And, when I decided I wanted to do sports, I really didn't look elsewhere. I just said, you know what, I'm gonna figure it out. I don't know exactly how.
Yeah,
but, I think I'm gonna be able to figure it out.
So did you decide at that time, in that process of meeting with the athletic director or Sam Gilbert, like, I'm gonna do sports?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
And is that what drove you to go to Villanova Law School, or?
No. So I applied to Villanova kind of on a fluke. A friend of my dad's had gone to school there, and he said, they've got a great program. It might be something you consider. And so I threw in a token application, but I really wanted to go to UCLA Law.
Got it.
And UCLA rejected me. I like to say it's because they only take a limited number of their undergrads. I'm not quite sure why, but nonetheless, I got into Villanova. It was the first school that accepted me, and I ended up getting accepted by, 4 or 5 others, but, decided that it's probably worth going back and seeing what it looks like. So flew back to Philadelphia, rode the train, never been on a train in my life.
Yeah.
Rode the train from Philadelphia out to the main line, and there's a stop right at Villanova's campus. I'm like, how cool is that? They got a train that goes there.
That's awesome.
So I got off the train and I walked around the school and I thought, you know what? Like, who does this, right? Like, nobody I knew, reached out, like, kind of into that uncomfortable a spot to, kind of relocate, in a strange place. In a place that I'd never been, and I thought, the more I thought about it, it appealed to me, because it was something that not everybody considered, and I always, I guess, have been a proponent of, kind of pushing the comfort zone. And in that sense, I did. I pushed the comfort zone. And,
So pushing the comfort zone is a theme.
yeah.
And is that just kind of across the board, family, business, education, whatever? It's just like get comfortable being uncomfortable?
Yeah, look, it's like we all have balance, and we all exhibit it in different ways. For me, I probably look. I'm a conservative guy. I mean, I like to go to the same place for lunch every day.
Yeah.
When I'm in Newport or whatever, it's like, I'll generally make reasonably conservative decisions. However, in some areas of my life, I have incredible risk tolerance. And, I guess that was exhibited by the choice of law school.
Yeah.
Like, why would you go all the way across the country? Look, I spent 3 years at Villanova answering the question, like, why'd you come here? You're from California.
Yeah.
And I used to have my pat lines that I'd say, hey, wanted to change, wanted to experience the other side of the country, whatever it was. But, it was not uncomfortable to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, okay, this is kind of cool. Like, nobody else does this.
Where do you think that tolerance for risk came from? Or what drives that?
I suppose, supportive parents, a supportive family, that they didn't necessarily encourage that way of thinking. If anything, my parents are, my father's passed away, but just saw my mother for Thanksgiving. She's 95 now.
Wow, that's amazing.
And, she's going strong. And, I would describe both of them as conservative, but they were stable and they were consistent. And I guess they gave me, the confidence to go explore and to pursue, the non-traditional. And so that's what I've done for most of my life.
Yeah, it's interesting because, there's so many entrepreneurial stories and I love them. And there's just a relationship between reward and risk, what people are willing to take.
Right.
And I've had so many friends along the way where I've challenged, like, get out of your comfort zone. I know it's safe, but you have this ability to do here. And it's just, that's not a trait or an attribute that people just have. I don't know if it's a learned thing, I don't know if what it is, but it's a really interesting part of the theme. So you're at Villanova, you're thinking about the sports career. Any mentors or Villanova or what? Any segues that kind of drew you into the sports career after that?
There were a few. Again, probably too detailed, but since you're asking, look, the general manager of the Philadelphia 76ers was somebody I, met kind of, through a series of relationships. And so I went and met with him and asked him about, roles in sports. And the guy at the time who headed up the umpires union, a guy named Richie Phillips, happened to be a Villanova law grad. And he came back and, did a talk, a fireside chat with a bunch of students. And, I was sitting in the front row and, was fascinated by, his story. Now, he did it more as a traditional lawyer.
Yeah.
And, I was not as inclined to do that, but rather, like the theme of, again, doing something different.
Yeah.
And so that
there's another theme though. You got another meeting with, did you say the GM of the Philadelphia 76ers?
Yeah.
Was that hard to get?
Not really. Again, in the spirit of there aren't that many people that ask.
Yeah, for sure. It goes back to the Aladdin factor because I watch people just kind of by default take what life gives them. And then it seems like, at least the way you're telling the story, these 3 meetings, that we've talked about, the athletic director, and then you went to Steve, and then the GM, kind of seemed like easy to get into, but I'm taking it they're not. It was very intentional. Yeah. And even if there was pushback, you probably would have figured out a way to get a meeting with them.
But there's connectivity with each. And it's like, I guess that's, I've been my partner in business today is a very successful entrepreneurial investor named John Najafi, who lives over in Phoenix, LA part-time, but Phoenix the rest of the time. And John and I have known each other for 20 years. And he always talks about my network. And the fact is that network has been something that I always believed was the most valuable part of business.
Yeah.
And to this day, I mean, it's, it's like, there's only 1 degree of separation.
Totally.
Between us and anyone in the world. And, it's, at a certain level, it's not that hard to get to anybody.
Yeah.
And I guess
For you.
Well, if you have the self-confidence to go out and make it happen, the answer is, that's probably right. But I don't think it's unique to me. I think that anybody who has that comfort, or confidence in themselves can go make that happen.
Would it be a safe assumption that you believe you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with?
Average in what way?
Well, I mean, it goes to that kind of law of exposure. And I think there's a lot of people and people listening. It's like the people you hang out with are the people you end up becoming, right? And so if you want to change your situation, a lot of times it's change your network.
Yeah, I think that's right. No, I think as I think about the question, I think I am. I think I truly am.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a couple strong peer groups that are, members of YPO, Young Presidents Organization, and, a group here in Newport, and then a group in San Diego, which I've been part of for 11 years. And between the two, they really are my peers, those 2 groups.
Yeah.
And I'm the average of probably both groups.
Yeah. It's interesting because YPO, which we'll talk a little bit more, which then becomes WPO, Young Presidents Organization, the forum, I think, is such a unique thing. I'm in Alder, which has a forum, and I don't know that just the structure of a forum, to be able to be in a place with your peers, a network of people that are same values, that can actually be a sounding board and a board of advisors for your life, is invaluable.
Yeah.
And without these organizations, I think it's for anybody. I think anybody needs to, just like you took, the athletic director and Steve needs to find mentors, and not just make them mentors, make them a board of their life.
Yeah.
And it's not a one-way road. It's like, not only are you getting value, you're adding value.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I've seen as a tremendous blessing in my life is successful people, if you're really interested, they really want to help people along the path.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost as much as anything, right?
Yeah.
They want to see you be successful, but they're not going to spend time with you unless they see that you're the right type of person. So we have to be the right type of person.
Great.
So going back to Villanova, how did that transition into the start of your sports agency career? Did you go practice law for a while?
So I came back to Newport, rented a place on Balboa Island.
Of course you did.
Ended up keeping that place for 12 years.
Okay.
Even after I bought my first real estate, a condo up in San Francisco, and was living primarily up there, I still kept this rental on Balboa Island, over a garage on Diamond Avenue, and loved it, and still walk by it and think about it all the time. Think about those days. But I came out to Newport. My father, the conservative side of my father, said, I know you want to do this sports stuff, but maybe you ought to do regular law first and see if you still want to do it. Kind of hoping I'd forget about, moving into sports. And so I said, all right, followed Dad's advice, went to work for a local...
So stop there real quick. I guess I don't know the path from law to sports agency. Could you have just gone right from law school into like a sports agency?
Sure.
Yeah, but
sure.
Okay.
So agencies weren't all that prevalent at the time either.
For sure. It's
in
changed.
Fact, I always tell people there were probably less than a dozen people in the U.S. at the time, this is early 80s, 83, 84, who were making their living by doing sports full time.
Yeah.
So that, or at least...
Was that just because of the time the salaries just weren't big enough?
That was one reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I first got involved in the representation business, the average salary in baseball was $300,000.
And what was the
average
fee?
salary in football was $160,000.
Oh man! And what was the fee that was?
Average fee was probably 3 to 4%.
So you're talking. I mean, it's not.
Pennies.
Yeah, it's not a lot. On 150,000, you're talking about 5%, 7,500.
A lot less than a successful realtor in Newport Beach makes.
For sure.
So I came back and practiced law followed Dad's advice, and went to work for a local litigation firm. They had a L.A. I guess they were based in L.A., but they had a Newport Beach branch office, and got to know a bunch of young lawyers well, and enjoyed that part of it, but really didn't warm to the practice of law.
Yeah.
So after 6 months, I'm like, you know what, I'm not going to bill hours ever again.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on, and I'm going to do what's in my heart. And so I began representing players, and I did that through same approach.
Okay, so
networking.
there's another crossroads. You're giving up the salary, because I'm assuming if you're going to represent players, you're only getting paid when they do deals. So you gave up the salary of being an attorney, which is another,
Yep.
Tolerance for risk.
I ended up, making $4,500 my first year in the
first
agent
year.
business. Second year, I had a big year. I think I got to $7,500.
Get out of here.
And but I didn't care.
So how are you
Because-
paying the bills?
Well, that's another story. So I borrowed money from everybody in my life. My dad loaned me $10,000. My cousin, I think I told you this once, who loaned me $6,000, to this day says I should have taken equity.
Yeah,
And he's
for
ri-
sure.
and he's right.
He should have, yeah.
But in fact, within the next year or two, I paid them both back, and that allowed me to kind of bridge my income gap at the time. And
But it was lean. You were living
it
lean.
was lean.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
How old were you at the time?
Probably 28.
Single at the time?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Single.
just you. That's great
Didn't
time.
get married till I was 36.
Okay.
So I was all in on the career.
Yeah.
And that's what I was focused on.
So let's talk. So when you jump from practicing law, like what did that look like? Did you just start did you team up with somebody?
Worked out of the Balboa Island apartment.
Okay.
And no, I put together about, I think probably 20 baseball players. Some of them ended
Just
up
when you
being-
say putting together, you just calling them?
no, it was all kind of networking.
Networking.
It was
okay,
all
back to the network.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was, a friend of a friend. If I'd met you at the time and you had a third cousin once removed
Got it.
who, knew somebody who played for the, SC baseball team, I'm like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Can you introduce me to
Yeah.
your cousin or whatever?
Yeah.
And the fact is, so I networked my way to a bunch of relationships. And
So there's something I want to stop here. People I have this ability to be incredibly persistent. Like I'll call somebody 7 times in a week, but in my mind, my mindset is I just know these people are really busy, and I know I'm the best at what I do, and I'm here to serve, and I give them the best chance. So when people are talking about having too much tenacity or you're being pushy, it was lost on me. And it sounds like it's kind of lost on you, because some might say, you had no shame. You were asking for this third cousin's introduction, right? It would seem like, but in your mind, what was your mindset in that time?
I think it was, look, I've always, frankly, had a big heart, and, I help people. In fact, I'm leaving this discussion and getting on a video call with a law student from the University of Santa Clara.
Got it.
Why? Because I spoke to her class on a Zoom.
Yeah.
And she happened to be the one that followed up and said, I really want to do a sports career. Is there any chance you'd get on a call with me? I said, of course.
Yeah.
So we scheduled a call.
So
We're gonna
you're
do it
giving
today.
back. Not only are you expecting, you're giving back.
And I guess I always sensed that, sure, there was some obligation that was created because so many people
Yeah.
were good to me at the time.
Yeah.
But I also sensed that there was an openness to people, look, some people will slam the door in your face.
But that didn't bother you?
No, I mean, if that's what it took to have another dozen,
Yeah.
help you or,
Yeah,
reach
right.
out, like, that's okay.
That's very unique, though. I think that probably doesn't seem unique in your world, but that's very unique in a lot of worlds to be able to do that and have the intention to do it and to take the rejection and continue. But I think the thing I love about what you said is, like, the more you give back, it seems like the more you get, right?
I think that's right.
You've been very, like, I had you come speak to my forum, and I even told the guys, don't reach out to him. He's super busy. And I know that probably all of them did, and I think you've met with a couple of them, so I truly appreciate that.
Only met with one. I got 2 to go.
Okay.
I'll get there.
Yeah.
And look, it's again, it was a process of doing, because I loved what I was doing.
Yeah.
It didn't matter how hard it was. It
Yeah.
didn't matter what the obstacles or hurdles were.
Right.
I decided I was going to do sports, and I didn't want to fail.
Yeah.
And so, you go to bed every night, thinking about the fear of failure.
Yeah.
It's a great motivator.
For sure.
And so
And 4,500 the first year and 10,000 the second year is not
7,500.
Oh, so it's not a real successful start.
No, but having 20 baseball players that, 5 of them were first round draft picks, and probably 3 of them went on to become significant players in the major leagues. Players like Will Clark of the Giants and Matt Williams, also the Giants and other clubs. Chris Gwynn, Tony's younger brother, Corey Snyder from BYU. A bunch of interesting players who came on board back in those days. John Hoover, who was the star pitcher of the '84 Olympic team in Los Angeles from Fresno State. Those are guys that I created relationships with, early on, and, ended up having career-long, in their cases, and lifelong friendships.
Yeah. Were there any of the first players or kind of the first deals you negotiated where you, there was like a taste and you're like, this is it, like, I loved it? Was there a specific story or a specific person that in the beginning that just, like, this was it, like, I know I'm on the path, doesn't matter how hard it gets, because it sounded like you pushed through it?
So I did a trip to Starkville, Mississippi. It was truly, they say you're on your last dollar. I think I was.
Yeah.
Actually, at that point.
Yeah.
In fact, I bought this Eastern Airlines ticket, this plane ticket that allowed as many stops as you wanted to make.
Yeah.
But you had to book the whole trip. So I booked like 18 stops around the country. Went
just
places.
Going solo by yourself?
Yeah, by myself. And I barely had enough money for a hotel room.
Yeah.
So that one of the meetings that I had set up during the Olympics in 1984 up at Dodger Stadium was because I represented, I think, 5 of the 20 players on that team, and I'd met this young first baseman who, actually, because Mark McGwire was playing first base on the Olympic team, got pushed to left field, and his name was Will Clark, and he went to Mississippi State. And so I had, got to know Will a little, but I got to know his parents a little better. And sure enough, his dad called out at one point the following year. He had a year left of school, so he went back, and he was actually the college player of the year that year. But his dad called me and said, listen, our coach up at Mississippi State or at State, as they called it,
State,
is doing an interview process for an agent for Will, and we'd like to know if you'd like to be part of that group. I said, absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't tell him I could barely afford the plane ticket to get there. And so I flew. One of the stops that I did on this Eastern Airlines trip was New Orleans, because that's where the parents were. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do this different. Everybody else is going to go into Starkville to meet with the coach and the player. I'm going to go see the parents first.
Why did you think that?
Because I just sensed that this was a family guy. This was a guy who was going to rely on their judgment as well.
Yeah.
And I thought that it was, good business.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
So I stopped there, had dinner with them. They said, by the way, do you want to stay at the house? I'm like, sure. Like, that'd be awesome.
You're like, if I don't have enough for a hotel room, that'd be great.
So I ended up, I literally slept in Will's bed.
Wow.
That night in his bedroom at his parents' home. And then the next day I flew up to Starkville, the Golden Triangle Airport in Mississippi. And I went and met with the coach, and it was in October of 1984.
Okay.
And it was actually it was Halloween, and I still recall the coach, a guy named Ron Polk, who was a legendary college coach, greeted me when I got there, and he said, "Listen," he said, "you're welcome to watch this little series that we're playing, inter-squad game." He said, "And by the way," he said, "there's another player on the team that would like to meet with you." And he said, "Would you mind meeting with him too?" I said, "No, that'd be great." I said, "What's his name?" He said, "Well, Rafael Palmeiro." I said, I'd love to, Coach. I said, "But is there any chance I could do separate meetings? Because it's kind of hard to talk about, how I want to focus and I want to support you and I want to be, more than just an agent. I want to be your friend."
Yeah.
If there's two of them sitting in the same room, it's a little tougher.
Yeah.
So Coach said, "Nah, you know what? It's not going to work. This is the only day we're doing this. But why don't you, it'll be fine. We're going to meet in my office." So the coach was sitting at his desk, and I had these two players.
You had Will and Rafael.
I had Will and Rafael sitting in front of me. And at the time, they were projected as the first and second draft picks in the country.
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, game on. So
did you have like a presentation? Did you know what you're going to say, or were you kind of?
No, I had it down. I kind of knew.
Yeah.
So Will walked in, and he's wearing his fatigues, his hunting fatigues, because he's dressed in his Halloween costume.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Raphael's a little more conservative, and he didn't, play the same, game, if you will. And so the two of them sat there, and so I did my pitch, and I'm like, there's no way this is going to work because, I'm just not as effective talking to both of them at once. Sure enough, the coach had set up this system where at the end of the interviews, they were interviewing 5 agents.
Yeah.
And like Cal Ripken's guy came in, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to, there's way, right? So, I'm like, whatever, I'll put my best face on it. We'll see what happens. But at the end of the interview process, the players wrote the name of the agent that they wanted to hire. And because of NCAA rules, which didn't allow them to commit to an agent prior to the expiration of their eligibility, the coach took that piece of paper, didn't even look at it, put it in a sealed envelope, and locked these envelopes in a safe deposit box.
No way.
And so, and the thing, or the thought was that when and if they're drafted, which certainly these guys were going to be drafted, and they were interested in turning professional, he would open up the envelope and then let the agent know whoever's name.
But this is months later.
Months later.
Yeah.
So I literally, this is October 83, or sorry, 84, and they weren't drafted until June the following year. So I knew I had to go build the rest of my draft class. I figure, I'm not getting these guys.
Yeah.
Well, turns out about a week before the draft, I got a call from Mr. Clark in New Orleans, and he said,
Will's dad.
He said, "Listen," he said, "you probably know your name's on that envelope." I'm like, "Mr. Clark, I had no idea." I said, "Is it really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, Will knew before you even went there. He said he watched you around the other players at the Olympics and last year, and he said he'd already made his mind up, but he said we're excited to work with you. Will ended up being a career-long client.
Yeah.
I'd negotiated his contracts for 16 years, and we were, in each other's weddings when we got married. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
So anyway, so.
But you said something else there that I think goes to, especially to me. As soon as you left that meeting, you were back filling your pipeline. It was just always filling the pipeline.
Oh yeah.
Right? Just relentless pursuit, never stop.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I guess in that sense, I was driven.
Yeah.
Driven to, again, by the fear of failure.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to make it work. So anyway, I went to.
That's an interesting thing. Real quick, I want to say there because I often there's one of my good friends I don't know what drives you. How can you do this day after day? I see you grinding it out, and personally, I think for me sometimes it goes back to the fear of not having anything, right? And I don't know if it's tied to the fear of failure, but it's part of this is I continue to do it, not just to provide for me, to provide for my family, to provide for all the people that are working for me. But there's this thing I have in me, and it sounds like you do, but you have such a calm demeanor. Usually that relentless pursuit comes across more aggressive, but it seems like you're just constantly always being driven to do and to fill the pipeline. Is that a safe assumption?
It's a safe assumption.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, everybody has their own styles.
Yeah.
And, it's true. Mine's a little lower key. I like to not show my hand.
Yeah, for sure.
I like to keep my mouth shut and kind of pick my spots, if you will. And so it turns out I went to the College World Series that year in Omaha, and Mississippi State was playing, and the draft was occurring during that same week of the World Series. And so I ran into Rafael Palmeiro.
And he didn't at that time. He had not identified you.
No, I had no idea.
Yeah.
So I ran into him. I said, and he ended up slipping in the draft. Will actually went number 2 in the country.
Yeah.
To the Giants. And Rafael slipped to number 25. And he went to the Chicago Cubs. And so the day after the draft, I bumped into him in the hotel lobby, and he said, "Hey," he said, "I didn't know you were going to be here." He said, "I assume you're here with Will." I said, "Well, I am," but I said, obviously I was looking forward to seeing you. And he said, "Well, your name's on that envelope." I'm like, "It is?" I said, "No." I said, "Rafi, I really didn't know that." And he said, "Oh yeah, you're my guy." He said, "I just didn't want to bother you because obviously, I didn't go that high in the draft." Rafael, this is a guy who went on to hit 500 home runs in the big leagues.
Yeah, for sure.
Rafi, I'm here if there's anything I can do. He said, "Well, maybe you could help with the contract." He said, "I kind of agreed to terms already." I'm like, "You did?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay." I said, "Look," I said, let's at least, talk it through. So we ended up, working together for a couple of years, and I'll never forget, he called me, and he and Will were intensely competitive with each other in college. Probably an understatement even.
Yeah.
But he called me one day, and he said, "Jeff," he said, "you're out there in California with Will." He said, "I'm here in Chicago." He said, "I think I'm going to use these local guys in Chicago." And I remember I was, really bummed at the time, but, look, what are you going to do? It's like in that particular setting, one of the few times that I'd lost a client, that I did lose a client in my career, but, that one I almost understood. It was like, I get it, dude.
Yeah, but it still didn't feel good.
No, it didn't feel good.
It's interesting because I've had a bunch of conversations with Mike Gray about this, and we continue to have this dialogue. Are we more motivated for the love of winning or the fear of losing?
Yeah.
Because it's like when you say that, because I think in my career, as much as I remember the wins, the ones I've lost, I mean, I can still feel them like they were yesterday, and some of them were a decade ago.
No, they hurt.
And it was like, and I go back and I think and try to dissect what could I have done better? What can I, you know what I mean? And you see those things, but it's an interesting dynamic in psychology, what motivates more.
Yeah.
Okay, so those were the first two.
I think it's both, by the way.
It is, but I think Tom Brady, is that, do they hate losing more or do they love winning? Which is more motivating, right?
Yeah. No, that's a great question.
Yeah, for sure.
It really is. So anyway, so look, I ended up getting a lucky break, and I guess early '85, I got to know a lawyer named Leigh Steinberg, and at the time.
So before we go to Leigh, so when you were doing all this, you were just at the Balboa Island rental, traveling around. You didn't have like an agency, a group around you. You were just kind of like forging your own path.
Yeah.
And is that kind of how it was done back then, or was there?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't ask.
Yeah. For sure.
And look, I knew that at the end of the day, the relationships were the power in that business. And, it was, I described.
What do you mean the relationships were the power?
In other words, having a player, confident enough in who I was, to be able to say, I'm going to trust you to guide my career.
Yeah.
Whether it's contracts, whether it's being a mentor, a friend, whatever it is. It's like those relationships created the power to be able to succeed.
And that goes back to when you said there was a lot of bad people in the business. Maybe they looked at this like a transactional thing, and you're like, this is a relationship.
I think that's right.
And it's like, if you think this is the seeds to like a great future that you've had. Okay, so you meet Leigh Steinberg.
So I met Leigh.
And was Leigh at the time, he was a big agent at the time, or was this in the beginning?
No, he'd been in the business for probably since 76, maybe 75, when he represented Steve Bartkowski, who was the first pick in the draft to the Atlanta Falcons that year out of Cal. And Leigh had met him at Cal Berkeley and had pieced together a really amazing practice that included, Warren Moon, who had signed the biggest NFL contract of all time, included Steve Young, who had signed the biggest contract of any athlete ever with the LA Express, back then an unheard of $42 million for 4 years. And again, remember, this is 1984, a long time ago. So in '85, I bump into Leigh, actually through a variety of relationships. I had worked with his longtime girlfriend, who would go on to become his wife, Lucy Semenek, who lived right here in Newport, was brought up here in Newport. And Lucy introduced me to Leigh, and I remember at the time, thinking, oh my God, here's one more guy that he thinks, wants his job.
Right.
And the fact is, I didn't. I was interested in learning from him, and so we spent a little time together. And at one point, he asked if I'd consider going to work for him. I said, Leigh, I'm kind of too independent, doing my own thing, right? I'm broke, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I got to at least play hard to get here. So
environment of scarcity, right? Great environment of scarcity.
So I ended up negotiating with him. He offered me a job. I still remember the number. He offered me a job for $36,000, which was more money than I'd made as a lawyer. Yeah. And I'm like, that's interesting. Even my dad says, maybe you ought to consider that Steinberg fella.
Yeah.
So I played a little hard to get, and he told me later. He said I'm negotiating with you, and I'm like, how could this guy be negotiating? He said, there's no way he could be making any money. Yeah. Sure enough, he was right. I wasn't, but
see, this is a theme I want to get into, because the limited transactions I've worked on with you, there's this like, your ability to negotiate is truly outstanding, which I want to talk about. And it, like, all these little themes that seem so subtle when you're saying them, you're negotiating against one of the biggest agents when you probably both know that you're not making any money, and you're saying no to $36,000 to try to get a better deal, right?
They paid me $42 in the end.
Okay, but still,
that
was more than you made in the first year. The difference.
No, that's right. That's right. And so I went to work with Leigh, and we were together for 18 years.
Yeah.
And we ended up changing the name of the firm at one point to Steinberg Moorad, and we had the largest NFL practice in the country for all 18 years. Second largest baseball practice. That little practice that I started became the second largest in the country for probably 15 years. And and I loved what I did.
Yeah.
For me, it was never work. It was always, moving chess pieces around the board. It was, just, enjoying the power of those relationships and being able to truly monetize them, not just for the clients, which was most important. They kept 95% of the action,
right.
But for us, because we were part of a salary escalation wave that occurred in sports where, those average salaries of $160,000 in the NFL and $300,000 in Major League Baseball were obviously numbers that were eclipsed dramatically over time.
Right.
So,
and that's just part of being in the right place at the right time.
In fact, I'll never forget, Leigh said to me early on, he said, I know you want to do these baseball players. He said, but, they're not making any money. He said, no, the football players are. He said, so, you need to help on football. I said, look, I love the negotiation work, so I'll do it all day long. And I did.
Yeah.
And I was literally, kind of a football lawyer by day. And then at night, I would run over to Candlestick. We worked in Berkeley at the time. I'd run over to Candlestick Park where the Giants were finishing a game and kind of show up in the parking lot like I'd been there the whole 9 innings.
Yeah.
And, hey, Will, Matt, whoever it was, I'd see my clients after games. But Leigh used to say to me, he said, you know what? One day, one of those baseball players is going to make $1 million. And when that happens, he said, and they pay us a $50,000 fee, he goes, I'll sit up and take notice.
Yeah.
Sure enough, Will Clark made $1,150,000 one year, and it was the first 7-figure salary in baseball that we had negotiated. And 2 years later, we ended up making him the highest paid player in baseball.
When you said Steve Young, I just thought, I read his book, right? And I thought his book was amazing about how he had anxiety. Like, as an agent, and you were a young guy, probably not a lot older, did you find yourself becoming like another father figure, working through their issues? Like, was it, the relationships were probably a lot more in depth than we're talking about?
I've always thought of it as more of kind of a big brother relationship in those days. Today, of course, I'm older, but back then it's like, Steve was like a younger brother, and I cared about him in that way too. I mean, I remember, riding in his Jeep Cherokee, which I got for him through a car deal I did with a guy named John Irish up in Marin County. And he got a new Jeep Cherokee every 3 months or something. And I remember riding in one of those Cherokees with him, after games, 2 hours after the game ended, we'd go meet up with the Mormon Mafia that was supporting him, and great friends of his and great people, and we'd go have dinner with them. And I remember riding, in one of those Cherokees one day, and I'm like, Steve, what's all this mail on the dashboard? He's like, he goes, it's stuff that comes to the facility, and he said, I don't have time to read it, so I just throw it up there. And so I said, you want me to look through it? He said, yeah, sure. So, I start looking through that. I'm like, dude, here's a paycheck. He's like, really? He goes, oh, I thought those got deposited. I'm like, I go, you want me to open it? He's like, yeah, go ahead, right? It's like, a check for, $80,000 or something. Awesome. I'm like, dude, this is a lot of money. Wait a minute, here's 2 more paychecks. He's like, seriously? He goes, I didn't know I missed all those. So I go, you want me to make sure they get deposited in your bank? He's like, yeah, that'd be great, right?
Yeah.
But, that's...
But it's part of, it's full service. You're wherever you can help out and add value and grow influence.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, anyway, it was an amazing lifestyle.
Yeah.
And it's one that, we worked really hard. I mean, as my significant other, Penny Lee, says, 25/8. And that's what it was. But you know what? It didn't seem like we were working.
Right.
Because we loved what we did. And we loved that role. And, it had the unique aspect of being, public and being, profiled, and we had annual Super Bowl parties that were legendary, and USA Today used to call our party, the best party at the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
it's kind of like, what?
Yeah,
seriously?
Yeah.
And so we did fun things, and we really enjoyed that time. And I had a terrific life. And
so Leigh Steinberg had one of the most, and still does, illustrious sports agent careers in history, but it was really Steinberg and Moorad. Was it ever tough in that world? Because he really was the son. I mean, they made a movie, Jerry Maguire, about him, obviously. So was that tough for that relationship with how much notoriety he got? But again, you guys were partners. You guys had the firm together.
It's like I've always said, people around me had more trouble with it than I did.
Yeah.
I didn't care.
Yeah.
I mean, I was more bottom line driven.
Yeah. This is what I get paid. I could care about.
At the end of each year, we were 50-50 partners.
Yeah.
And, we, on December 31st, I generally told Leigh how much money we made, and we split it to the penny.
Yeah.
And, for me, that was probably more important than the public profile side of it.
Yeah.
But I ended up getting plenty as a result of just kind of being around. Gosh, the first day that I went to work for Leigh in '85 was April '85, and I walked into the house that we worked in up in the Berkeley Hills and on Panoramic Way up above the football stadium at Cal, and I walked in, and Morley Safer from 60 Minutes was sitting in the living room doing an interview with Leigh.
Yeah.
And so I got in one of the background shots, right? Like, here I am, my first day on the job. I'm on 60 Minutes,
Yeah.
Yeah. And believe it or not, he did an incredible profile that was all positive.
Yeah.
As opposed to the typical 60 Minutes, hatchet job. They were completely positive about Leigh. And so, that's how I was introduced to the firm.
Yeah.
And I never really looked back. I mean, there was sure, it's like, like from the outside in, people are like, oh my God, like Leigh does all these interviews and like that's what he's motivated. I'm like, it's okay. He also recruits some of the best players in the world.
Right.
And I get to do the negotiation, so I don't care.
So when it came, so when you looked at your part of the job, his part of the job, he'd bring somebody in and it's just like, Jeff, you got the negotiations.
Yeah, often.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, he wasn't uninvolved.
Sure.
But I loved taking the lead.
Totally.
And that's what I enjoyed, and that's that's how I built a big part of my reputation.
Yeah. And so we're going to this theme of negotiation. Is there a time when you were younger where you just realized you had an innate ability to negotiate better than other people?
Not really, but I guess in looking back at it, Tim, I was brought up by a father who was always a negotiator himself, so that he was the head of purchasing for Gallo Winery.
Yeah.
Bought everything that the winery, actually the largest employer in Modesto, my hometown, but worked for a family business, privately held business, largest winery in the world. Dominant stats. I mean, they literally own, forget the old jug wine reputation they had in the early days. The Gallo owns 25% of the domestic wine market and 10% of the world wine market.
Yeah.
So that when you think about those numbers, the production that winery does 365 days a year, they do their own glass, their own bottles, everything that went into that, winemaking business, with the exception of the fresh grapes, which were bought by Giulio himself. Everything else was purchased by my father's department. And so he headed up that department. He taught one of the Gallo sons, Bob Gallo, actually grandson of Giulio, taught him how to run that department. And his father, who was the chairman of the winery for years, always said that in his view, the most important part of the business was reducing expenses. And that went right to the cost of whatever you were buying. so that I learned from my father early on.
So did he actually teach you that, or like in parenting, more is caught than taught, or is it just something you picked up?
I think it's more picked up,
Yeah.
but it was that everything's negotiable.
Yeah.
So that my dad used to, I used to watch him, like all the relatives would ask my dad to sell their cars when they were done with them, or to
Okay.
buy their new ones.
Yeah.
Because my dad always knew kind of where the margins were and how to buy things
Yeah.
wholesale.
Yeah.
And so, I learned that everything was negotiable.
Yeah.
So that even if there's a sticker on,
It's really
on an
not.
item,
Everything isn't negotiable.
you could still offer anything.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's funny though. This comes to like a belief system that's inherent to how you were raised, because not a lot of people share that everything's negotiable. They just don't, and you see that in life where people just never are willing to ask or negotiate what they're worth. Right? It's like you get what you negotiate, not what you deserve in life. Right?
but I guess it goes back to that same theme of don't be afraid to ask.
Right. The Aladdin factor.
And it's the same concept
know.
when it comes to pricing. And
But that's such a unique trait, because it's something that, I just watch, and like nobody thinks to go and ask the athletic director for a meeting. Like, why not?
yeah,
Why isn't everybody asking? And you're right. There's probably not very many people asking, but you were the one that asked, and then it went to Steve. You know what I mean? So
it's the same skill set, if that's what you want to call it, that whether inherent or learned, that that in the agent business allows a Will Clark to become the highest paid player in baseball as a young, probably 2 years before he should have been, if at all. And it's the same idea of not asking what the rules are, but rather focusing on a goal and getting it done.
Right.
And not being afraid to position or ask, and not necessarily just the most aggressive way, but in a way that's realistic. Granted, outside the norm, but something that you can feel good enough and that you can develop enough of a case to argue for.
Yeah, but there's a couple of things. What you just said there, it's focusing on what you want and not really worrying about the how. And a lot of people get bogged down in like there's rules they have to live by. And one of the things that you said, because I've noticed this in my dealings with you, is sometimes I'll think we're done. And you're like, well, wait a second here. What if we were to do this? I'm like, I guess we could do that. I hadn't really thought about it. It's cliche to say think outside the box, but like I don't think you have a box.
No, I don't think anyone who is a creative deal maker is constrained by rules.
Yeah.
Right. It's more about it is about thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
It's about thinking, how do I say it? Within the boundaries of fairness.
Yeah.
But still outside the lines.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that you can continue. You like that's the thing, like in negotiations, and I think this is something I've seen a theme, you can continue to talk in a respectful way and ask for other things and stress test to see if you can create better terms or a price through that.
That's right.
And so continuing the dialogue, which even goes back to the theme of the Aladdin factor. You're asking for these meetings where people aren't thinking about, well, you're going to continue the dialogue even though we haven't really finalized or put pen to paper, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have this unbelievable career with Leigh Steinberg. You guys are signing the biggest quarterbacks. Now baseball has come, and at some point there was a transition. What happened there?
So we sold 3 businesses back in 1999, and one of them was our core business.
Okay.
And we
You sold your agency business?
Yeah.
Had that been done before?
Yeah, David Falk, who represented Michael Jordan, had sold his business for $100 million earlier. I guess it was earlier that year, maybe the year before. And I remember thinking, you know what, there's no reason why we can't do the same thing. And the fact is, although David dominated basketball,
Yeah.
we dominated
Baseball.
two other
Yeah.
sports. And, the argument was, why not consider, us? So we hired CAA,
Okay.
Creative Artists
Yeah, yeah.
Agency, to represent us. And they opened doors, and we had chairman level access to multiple public companies who all made bids on our business.
Wow.
And one of them was a
And this was 99. This is kind of right before we had a blip with the tech stuff. Like this was
right.
Right before things started
Yes.
to shift economically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
there we go. Lucky timing.
We were lucky. We actually sold an internet business that year too, to an early athlete website business called Athlete Direct, and we sold that business to two VC firms, Sequoia Capital and Redpoint. At the time, they were IVP, and we sold that business. We sold a marketing business that we had built to a guy named Bob Sillerman, who was rolling up radio stations at the time, and he had bought Falk's business.
Was this kind of your intuition on instigating these sales?
Yeah.
And what was the reason? Like, why did you have that intuition?
Well, I wasn't smart enough to know anything about the economy. It wasn't for that reason. I got lucky on timing.
Right.
But the fact is, it was more about having an instinct for value creation.
Right.
And for me, I argued to Leigh that, there was a reason to take capital gains dollars off the table.
Sure.
And that we could sell at, significant multiples. I didn't even know what a traditional business multiple was back then.
Yeah.
And my pitch was really simple. It's like, it's either 9 figures or go home.
Yeah.
And everybody looked at me, or a lot of people looked at me.
But traditional multiples are not really on a service business.
Yeah, right. Maybe.
And so that was
although I don't even know if I knew that.
Yeah, right.
The chairman of Assante, which ended up being the company that bought our core business, at one point he looked at me and he said, "You realize that what you're asking for is a 22.5 multiple?" I said, "No, actually I didn't."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, what do you mean?"
Did you say you think that's too low?
I said, I said, you know what? I mean, honestly, I don't really care how you get there. You can justify it any way you want.
Yeah.
But we're not going to do a deal for less.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, he made the deal, and we took a lot of money off the table and went on to employment contracts, which, for me, friends of mine would say, "Oh my God, like, how are you doing that? You're only getting paid like, a couple $100,000 after all those years of, more." I said, "I sold my business." He said, "I never did this for the money.
Yeah.
I did it because I love the work."
Yes.
And so for me,
it's totally different than the instinct to build a business to sell it. Like, right? Like,
exactly.
That's like the new model. You build a business to sell it. That generally doesn't work.
Well, it can work really well, but it wasn't why we were in the business. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and we found a buyer, and so we sold the business. So I worked on that employment contract for 4.5 years.
After.
And, and look, I did it because I loved the work. And so it wasn't, it was probably somewhere in the middle part of that 4.5 years that I began to think about a second career. And for me, the second career was the idea of getting involved in ownership on the team side. And by the way, I didn't know what sport it would be in. So that, a local guy, Vinny Smith, and I looked at buying the Anaheim Mighty Ducks at the time.
Okay.
And we actually made an offer that Disney countered. And years later, I ran into Michael Eisner and I said, "Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but I met you years ago when we were bidding on the Ducks." And he said, "Were you the guys that offered us $15 million? I said, "That was us." And, before you laugh, the fact is they countered at 40. Yeah. So it wasn't like we were far off.
Yeah.
But, to his credit, my friend Henry Samueli outsmarted us. He owned the Arrowhead Pond at the time. And so he made the deal to take the team, and it's worked out great for him.
Yeah.
But at the time, my idea...
So you were thinking at that time on the employment contract, I want to go into ownership. I want to be
and sport was irrelevant.
Yeah.
So that I'd never.
But did that seem like preposterous in that field? Like, had anybody ever gone from the agency side and actually bought? You look at like sports teams, it's always some billionaire that's in another business that's like, I want to buy this. You're going as an agent into ownership.
Yeah. Well, but there weren't a lot of agents that had sold their business for, big money.
Fair.
Either.
Yeah, fair.
And so, I again, it was all in kind of the art of the possible.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like, look, why not?
Right.
Right. So no one ever had.
Yeah.
There have been a number of agents that had gone into, management roles, being general managers or taking other similar roles. For me, I'm like, I'd rather run a club. And I didn't care about the sport. So that, again, we almost bought an NHL club.
Yeah.
And if I had, my life would have been much different, at least that part of my life.
Yeah.
But I also...
Was the agency side at some point, were you evolving past it, like you were growing into something else? Were you getting tired of that, of the chase, if you will?
It's a fair observation. I got tired of the service business.
Yeah.
Loved the work, loved the guys, but, recruiting new players every year got tiring.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like...
Every year you start at zero.
Yeah, I used to always... say, look, when I could play the big brother role, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
When I was playing the uncle role, it got a little less fun. And pretty soon I was older than the moms and dads.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'm like, do I really want to do this the rest of my life? And the answer was no. What I wanted to do was play a more significant role as a principal in the sports business.
Yeah.
And so I ended up getting lucky. A partner
we are
of mine.
Again, lucky.
Well, I was lucky.
It's a theme, though.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say luck is like a loser's excuse for a winner's commitment?
Yeah, you've never said that before, have you?
But it just fits because
That's a good
it's like
line.
it's
That's
funny
a good
because
line.
it's like in all of these great stories, this is like not a perfect path. It's not like this was a gold path to ownership for you, right?
Yeah.
Like you're bumping along here and it's like it really is like the harder you work, it seems like the luckier you get, right?
Yeah, maybe.
And maybe luck is kind of the crossroads of like opportunity with somebody that's willing to do what it takes, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. It's a good description. So a partner of mine, a guy named Joe Lacob, who now owns the Golden State Warriors.
Sure.
He and I...
That was a good purchase.
He had become a friend, and we actually made a bid together to buy the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Phoenix Suns at the same time.
Wow.
They were both controlled by a friend of mine named Jerry Colangelo. And so I had gone to Jerry and asked if he'd consider selling both of them to us. And he said, yeah, I would. So we ended up actually signing a term sheet to buy the Suns. I still remember the numbers, $385 million.
What year was this?
This was 2003. And but we also made an offer for the Diamondbacks that was much less bullish. And it's because the Diamondbacks' economics at the time were in much more desperate shape.
Yeah.
So we were trying to get a bargain on the Diamondbacks and willing to pay more of a premium on the Suns, which were, an established NBA franchise at the time. Diamondbacks had won a World Series a couple of years earlier, but since then had really been challenged economically.
Yeah.
So at one point, Jerry came to us and said, look, I can sign up a deal on the Suns, but my partners at the Diamondbacks have asked if you'll come present to them, kind of your ideas about how you would run the club and how you would proceed. Well, remember, I'm still an agent at the time, right? So I'm sitting in front of this executive board at the...
Wait, so they wanted you to prepare, like, this is my plan if we were to get it.
Yep.
And does this take you back to, like, college when you're having to prep for, like, you're like, I don't really know. I'm sure you knew.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you're kind
Joe
of...
Lacob and I flew down. We were both in Park City on vacation. And I remember telling my wife at the time, my wife, who was my wife at the time, I said, you know what, I'm really sorry, but I've got to fly to Phoenix for the day. And she knew what I was working on, so she was supportive. And so so Joe and I flew down to Phoenix, and we went and met with the Diamondbacks, board, and kind of laid out our ideas. And we ended up landing back in Salt Lake, and Jerry called, and I remember telling Joe, I said, Colangelo's calling. He said, well, let's see how we did. So I said, Jerry, well, how'd we do? And he said, you guys did great. He said, but they decided that they didn't want to sell. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, look, I'm still willing to go forward with the Suns transaction if you'd like to, but, it's your call. And so I said, hang on just a second, put them on hold. I said, Joe, they're willing to sell Suns, but we're not going to be able to do Diamondbacks. And I said, what do you think? And he said, look, our whole premise was we can run those clubs together. It'll make more sense. Let's pass. Said, okay. Said, Jerry, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to do it.
Did you feel the same way? Did you want to pass?
I suppose I wasn't sophisticated enough on ownership at the time to know, or even to be disciplined enough to say no. Yeah. And by the way, we had both written, large checks.
Right.
And we gave them $17.5 million as a deposit. Yeah. I think I had the smaller end of that, but it was still $5 million of my own money that we had given them as a deposit and given Jerry. And Jerry said, okay. He said, look, I'll arrange to get your checks back to you. I said, all right. So we walked away. And so, I was, and look, at the time, Joe was a senior partner at Kleiner Perkins, right, which was which still is one of the greatest VC firms in history, up in Menlo Park or Palo Alto, and I had a day job, so I went back to my day job, and about 6 months later, I got a call from the guy who had ended up taking over Jerry's role as the managing partner of the Diamondbacks. And he said, listen, I know that, you were disappointed when we told you no, but it doesn't mean that we didn't think you had a great plan. And if you're still willing to discuss that, we'd be willing to sit and talk to you about running our club. I'm like, really? Yeah. So the first thing I did is I called Joe Lake up and said, dude, like, this is out of the blue. Like, I don't know what to say. I'm not going to do anything if this offends you. Yeah. He's like, Jeff, I'm a partner at Kleiner Perkins. He said, I'm good. He said, this is your life. Yeah. He said, you need to go pursue your dream. Yeah. And so I said, okay. So with his blessing, I ended up sitting with Ken Kendrick at the Diamondbacks, and we worked out an agreement that allowed me to become a general partner in the club, to acquire ownership as well, which I did over time, and to be the CEO of the team. That's awesome. So that's how I made the transition.
It's amazing how you go this way and it comes a totally different way. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So you owned the Diamondbacks for a good period of time, and then you guys went into San Diego. You did the Padres, and we're going to fast forward a little bit because I want to get just to a little more current. At one point in there, you had a NASCAR team, right?
While we were in Arizona, a guy who worked for me, who was my chief operating officer at the time, named Tom Garfinkel, who now is the CEO and vice chairman of the Miami Dolphins. Tom and I bought a NASCAR team and ran that team for about 4.5 years. He came with me over to San Diego and became the club president there. And so we finally sold it because we had day jobs, and we decided that it was just too much work to fly back and forth to North Carolina every weekend. Yeah. So we sold the team, but it was a good exposure to motorsports for me.
You've gone from the agency owning 2 baseball teams. And it's so interesting because as you talk about all these friends, it's funny how the relationships just keep on coming back, right? It's from a COO to an investor to this or that. But talk to us about Formula One, right? Because Formula One has become the hottest sport in the world. And I'm sure it always has been for America, this drive to survive or whatever this Formula One is. This was pre-Drive to Survive. How did you guys get connected to the McLaren and Formula One?
So I talked a little about Jom Najafi earlier. Jom and I formed an investment platform called MSP Sports Capital. Moorad Sports Partners was actually the precursor to that. And then when I partnered with Jom, we changed the name to MSP. And MSP is a business that's based in New York, and he and I are the principal owners of it. And we really use our sports background. In Jom's case, he's a longtime owner, second largest owner of the Phoenix Suns, vice chairman of the team, has sat on the NBA Board of Governors for 15 years. And combining our interest in sports investing along with Jom's long history of successful, disciplined investing, we created a platform that focuses on what I call disciplined investing in the sports industry, which when we began, there really weren't many firms. In fact, we were often named on lists of, the 8 or 10 firms in the country that focused on, sports investing. Today, I think several years later, or 5 years later, there's probably, hundreds of firms that are now focused on finding interesting investments in sports, as sports has really become a bit of an asset class in and of itself. So
again, theme first to market. It seems like you've kind of been a pioneer throughout your whole career.
I mean,
you're pioneering your early.
Those are big words.
Yeah,
but,
okay.
I mean, it's
different type of pioneer.
Again, it's right place, right time.
Yeah.
And in the spirit of that, we began looking for investments in sports that that were proprietary, that not everybody saw. So that, we didn't participate in processes or auctions or, we didn't talk to although we talked to investment bankers to get smarter and to learn, we didn't do it to participate in their auction process.
But you're not actually out prospecting, looking for opportunities. At this point, is the brand bringing in more opportunities?
It's the network.
The network.
Okay. Yeah, both Jom's network and mine. Are bringing opportunities to us. Last year we looked at 203 deals in sports.
Wow. Okay.
All shapes and sizes, globally, some domestic, most out of the country, and we beat up all of them. And we looked at them, and of that list, probably 20 were actually interesting, and we drilled down on 10 of those, and we ended up making a couple investments. And several years ago during the pandemic, front end of the pandemic, we had gotten to know the folks in Bahrain, the sovereign wealth fund from Bahrain that owns the McLaren Formula One team. And we had told them, probably 5 years ago, look, if there's ever anything that's interesting or that you would consider in your Formula One investment, we would love to talk to you. Had no idea that anything would come from it, but
really rare though to have opportunities to get into Formula One with the history and the money behind it, right?
Well, there are only 10 teams to start with, so and most of them have traditionally been owned by auto manufacturers like Mercedes and Ferrari, Renault and Aston Martin, etc. So we had no idea whether anything would come of it. And at the front end of the pandemic, we got a call from the chairman of McLaren and the CEO, a guy named Zach Brown, who's from LA and runs the race team, who we had gotten to know. Turns out he's a big baseball fan. So, I'd spent a good amount of time with him talking about baseball. Big Cardinal fan. He actually named one of his sons McGuire.
Wow.
Which is an interesting fact. And although spells it different, he makes it clear where the name came from. And so they called and said, look, we've been authorized by our board to hire J.P. Morgan to go find a strategic partner for the race team. And before we retained J.P. Morgan, we wanted to know if this was something you'd be interested in. Mostly, we're coming to you because we like you, but we think that sports-centric, U.S.-focused ownership could be interesting for us. And we said, look, we're very interested. Tell us the facts. So they gave us the facts. They described why the business needed a bit of a bridge, a couple £100 million bridge.
And was this as a substitute to JP Morgan? They're like, we want to talk to you before we do the JP Morgan. So you were instead of the JP Morgan.
So we ended up preempting their process.
Got it.
We came back 24 hours later, laid out a structure that we said worked for us. They said, we're willing to do that structure.
And this is the starting of COVID, though.
This is in early 2020.
So this is when the world feels like it's falling apart. There's not a lot of people acquiring anything, let alone...
But Formula One races were still going on.
They were, but in the Drive to Survive, it seemed like there was a couple that were pushed off, right?
No, there were. Yeah, their season was 17 races instead of 23. But, nonetheless, they were still racing.
Yeah.
And so... John and I, did a good amount of diligence on the business and concluded that it was not unlike a lot of sports teams that we had seen where they were losing money, they were, struggling financially. In this case, the business was losing 65 million pounds at that stage, and we said we think there's a path to profitability here. And so. Sure enough, we got involved. We closed the deal in December of that year of 2020. And now, 2 years later, the business is profitable.
It's probably really profitable, right?
It's doing okay, and it's been a really great path for us. It's been kind of a combination of everything we knew in sports and business. And even in motorsports in my case, and we've been able to help support Zach and his management team. And
I feel like I know him because of the show. Like when you see all the the show had not. When did the show actually get launched?
I think they've finished 4 seasons. So they've done.
But I think the first season was maybe 2019.
I think it was 19,
which aired in 2020. Right. So it's like that couldn't have been. I mean, that's been really big for the sport, hasn't it?
It's been huge.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, Formula One is, it's so funny, too, because Drive to Survive impacted women and kids.
As
much as any.
Yeah.
And so that just yesterday I was with somebody and he said, you have no idea how much my wife loves Formula One.
Right.
I said, I bet it's because of Drive to Survive. He's like, how did you know?
Yeah.
I said, because everybody tells me that.
For sure.
And it's because there's something about the show. Now, look, my gal Penny says it's because these young, handsome drivers are pulling their shirts off. And, you get to know them as people. And aside from the fact that they're young, handsome guys, but you get to know them and you go deep into their lives off the track. And, so you get to know how competitive and how sophisticated that business really is. I mean, look, we have 850 employees in London that work for McLaren Racing. And, 500 of those are engineers.
Right.
But the fact is that it's an incredibly sophisticated business where they're chasing milliseconds, right?
Yeah.
For a half second, a team would give anything for it.
Right.
Today, thankfully, they have cost caps, which restrict the amount of money you can spend on the car build, so the big teams can't just outspend you.
Right.
But the fact is that we found a business that we believe in. We love the brand. It's a brand that's going to celebrate 60 years as a race team next year. So that it's a long-time business founded by a guy from New Zealand, Bruce McLaren, who ended up dying prematurely in a car crash. He was a Formula One racer. But his legacy continues, and we're now part of it.
So a few more questions. What's the next career? What's the next 10 years?
I think I'm pretty happy these days doing what I do. I teach at UCLA Anderson. I have 60 MBA students every year that I always swear it's my last year, and then I do another. So I've done that for 11 years now, and it's great fun. And, I like giving back, and I like being involved with, a variety of businesses in sports. We just acquired the X Games.
I saw that.
From the Walt Disney Company and ESPN, and that's a new challenge for us.
Is it, with the X Games, is it just like, you just take this as any other new venture, you take your skill set, look where it goes, and you're trying to, obviously looking at the bottom line, but trying to grow the business?
Yeah, at this stage, it's about hiring the right people and letting them do their job. And, I think it was Tom Garfinkel from back in my Arizona days who used to say, look, we need to hire best of class talent, give them enough autonomy to do their jobs, hold them accountable to a bottom line, but let them fail and succeed.
Yeah.
And so that's really the approach that John and I have too, as we run these businesses or oversee these businesses and support the management teams that do great work.
Yeah.
Zach has a great management team. Our new CEO for X Games came from Twitch. He's phenomenal. We're watching him and helping him build out his management leadership team, and it's a lot of fun to support.
So, final questions. Is there a motto or a quote that seems to be top of mind or that you've lived by?
It's probably more of a mantra as opposed to a quote. I always believe, I'm asked often, what's the most important skill in negotiating? And I always, I tease people, to get them to, say the right answer. But the fact is that it's listening. And, most people would think that it's advocating or it's somehow being able to enunciate a position or to argue a point of view. And the fact is that I believe in business and in life, as well as negotiating. The ability to listen well is probably the most important skill of all. Because if you can really hear and, forget your own agenda for a moment and put yourself in the mind of the person you're dealing with or doing business with or trying to, be competitive with in business. If you can listen to what they're really saying, it's amazing what they'll tell you that they don't really intend to tell you.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's really about being a good listener. And so that's what I tell people. I tell young people that all the time.
Right.
And I encourage them to think about, listening first and speaking second.
Is there part of that, because I'm a huge proponent of that, is there a part of that is understanding and asking the right questions?
Of course.
Yeah, because it's like the questions elicit, right, the right listening. Is there also a part of that, and I have one final question, with the questions, like listening, but eliciting questions, when you're teaching your MBA class, have you ever done like a mastermind in negotiation? Like, have you ever put, like, if there are 3 or 5 bullet points of negotiation by Jeff Moorad, what would they be?
Yeah. Even in terms of what a prototype case would look like.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's about assessing the dynamic. It's about, doing the right kind of background research. It's about understanding the dynamic that you're dealing with. It's understanding the climate.
Yeah.
It's where the person came from, how they think, what their history is. And it's understanding what your leverage is.
Yeah.
Or lack thereof. And by the way, if you have no leverage, it doesn't mean you can't still win a successful negotiation. You just have to be more careful how you present it. And I've always believed that, look, you can't lie, you can't, BS your way to the result you want. You have to be straight, you have to be calm. In my case, rarely raise my voice.
Yeah.
But I'm stubborn as can be.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think if you put all those things together and do them properly, you can end up with an A+ result.
I think at some point in the future, I want to unpack that a little more, because the negotiation I've experienced with you, and I really do pride myself on being a great negotiator. And in all that, we sell 250 homes a year, and now I'm working with some very successful people. Anytime I can learn anything, I'm all about it. But the experience I had in the little negotiation we had just opened my eyes up to a lot of things, and it made me realize how much more there's to learn. So I appreciate you being here. This has been a fantastic hour spent with you, and I know the listeners will love it. And I look forward to our next time. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to RUHM, presented by the Smith Group. This episode was hosted by Tim Smith and produced by Michelle Akers. Chris Stacy is our studio director. Editing by Jake Austin. Special thanks to Pacific Staging and Sandy Newport.